I'd like to share with you, this is really hot. We're doing this one or this one? Which one? This one's really loud. I don't like that one. Here. All right, I'm going to share with you all a tweet this morning, but don't worry, it's not one of the political ones, so you can relax. It's one that caught my attention yesterday and totally cracked me up. It says, I'm contacting an author whose manuscript was due in 1987, a full 30 years ago. The rest of you can now feel a little bit better for being a little late. Isn't that great? Those of you who are academics in the audience or authors or know about deadlines might really get a kick out of that one, a little 30 years late. It cracked me up and it came across my Twitter feed because you may not know, but when I was in seminary, I wasn't cool like Chris Hackett. I didn't have some cool bartender job to work and put me through school. Oh, no. I worked at a university press in the manuscript editing department with all of my people, the total dorks and grammarians. Those were my people. And so that's what I did for cash while I started out on seminary, was that I was an assistant to the editors at a university press. And these folks would spend their days, 16 of them, working to make sure that academic manuscripts that illuminated something very particular and unique about one tiny little part of the great knowledge of the world, one really special thing, was clear and grammatically correct and had all the footnotes in the right places. Scintillating, I tell you what. And so it was my job to make sure these 16 folks felt supported. You know, I would fill in for some of the things they did while they were on vacation. I'd make sure they had the right colored pencils. That was really critical, the right colored pencils, or show up, or when some professor showed up with like one of those floppy disks that was like this because they had started writing their manuscript 30 years ago when floppy disks were the thing, I would have to translate those from WordPerfect. Does anybody remember that? WordPerfect and do all that. So I did some of those things. And because I was in seminary, they allowed me to keep some flexible hours. So sometimes I would show up for work, say 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning, work for a couple hours, go to class from 10 to 2, and then come back and work in the afternoon. And it was just one of those mornings in an office building that's a little too cold for the weather that this story takes place. It's about 6 a.m., only half of the lights are on, the cubicles are quiet, and down the hallway comes Padding, one of the senior manuscript editors. She's been there a long time. She has seniority. And she turns around and she says to me, "Are you responsible for this?" That's not a good beginning to a conversation, you all. Whew! And I don't remember to this day what I did wrong, but I had really, really screwed something up. I mean, I can't remember, but I remember how her words made me feel because she talked, and then a little more, and then a little more, and a little more, until I just felt terrible. And at the end of the conversation, all I could muster in my defense to squeak was, "I was only trying to help." And she walked away. And she got about halfway away before she wheeled around and she said, "A word of advice, kiddo." I don't know if you've ever met anyone who's struggling to make it in their 20s and thinks they're working really hard, but calling them kiddo will get their attention. So I'm kind of surprised that I could hear what she said next because the word kiddo had rested so hard. She said, "Listen, if the only thing you can say is that you were trying to help, if that's all you got, then you're probably wrong. If the only excuse you can muster is, 'I was only trying to help,' then you're probably wrong." I remember that. I don't remember the mistake, but I remember that wisdom because it stayed with me for a very long time. And it's giving me the insight to slow down, to pump the brakes before I rush in someplace to try to rescue or do something maybe I'm not supposed to do. If the only thing I can come up with is I'm just trying to help, then I might need to slow down and think twice about that. You see, I thought of that today when I was reading over this parable. It's an interesting parable we have, and it has a lot of sort of sticking points and questions in this parable of the weeds and the wheat. You can see a beautiful field on the front of your bulletin there. It's a story about a landowner who has this field, and the folks who are tending it notice that it seems to be a lot of weeds coming up with the wheat. These folks, they want to rush in and help. Oh my gosh, should we weed the field? We've got to get the weeds out of here. But in his wisdom, the landowner says, wait. These have already grown. You see, the parable tells us there's already a little fruit out there. You can tell the difference between the weeds and the wheats. To pull the weeds now would be to compromise the full yield of the field. That is, because they are already so far along, you couldn't pull those weeds without harming the healthy plants. And so he counsels them, patience, wait. We will wait until the end of the harvest, and then we will separate one from the other. I like to think of all of his servants as being the voice of those folks saying, I was only trying to help. Rushing in to weed the garden. I don't know if you've ever sent children out to weed your garden. Be careful if you do. But rushing in to weed the garden because the wise landowner knows that that would compromise the full yield. I think there's some wisdom in there for us today. You see, God is a lot like that landowner of our lives. God knows that our fields are complex, that we have weeds and wheat growing up right alongside one another, and that sometimes it takes patience and time to tell the difference from one to another. And one of the things that I love about being a part of you all, a part of this community, a part of this congregation, is that we know the fields in which we minister, the ways in which we serve the world are complex ecosystems. Weeds and wheat flourish alongside one another, and only one of those will sustain us. But to be so certain as to root out the weeds too soon is to threaten our very survival, to face starvation from having ripped up the wheat with the weeds. You see, we serve a God who knows us, who loves us so deeply that this God does not want us to risk starving our souls in the name of a pure wheat field. And so we can walk on through those fields of our lives, tolerating the weeds and the wheat together, knowing that they're both growing up together and resisting that temptation to just try to help, and make it all pure or right or clean or certain too soon. This Friday of this week, in the very seats where you all are sitting, all the clergy of the Diocese of East Tennessee will gather. And people from every one of the parishes of the Diocese of East Tennessee will gather, and they will fill this space, the cathedral, the seat of the diocese. And together, all these people will vote for the next bishop of the Diocese of East Tennessee. And we have 5 wonderful, faithful people who have put their names forward for this. And so we will spend that day thinking and praying and talking about what God is doing among us and casting ballots. And it will take some time because an election is not achieved until 2/3 of both the lay house and the clergy house agree in majority, 2/3, on the same candidate. So sometimes that takes a little time in that process. I ask your prayers. A lot of folks have been talking about what is it that we need? What is it we're looking for a leader for this diocese, for this next age? And to be honest with you, I'm hoping that it's someone who's patient, who's not too quick to harvest. I'm hoping it's someone who's not afraid to know that there are weeds and there is wheat and that it's complex, but who's able to lead us with patience and wisdom and humility that God knows the harvest, the time and day of the harvest. And so that's what I'm hoping for a leader, is someone who knows that, you know what, it's not all simple. We can't sit here among the pews and say, this one's weeds and this one's wheat, and here we go, and pluck it all out. We have to grow up together and trust that God in God's time will help us to discern what it is that is going to sustain us and feed us through the next age. So friends, pray for us as we come together to elect this leader. But let us also walk together in faith and humility, knowing that we are the beautiful fields of God's mission. Amen.